Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing virtual tour that we are going to be doing together. It's like if you can just make sure that everyone that needs to be on mute is on mute, in case they aren't. Thank you all so much for putting up with me for yet another day. Can't believe that we got not just yesterday and not just today, but another 2 days after this, which is just really amazing. And yesterday, we went to the amazing gateway to the land of Israel. We arrived on our pilgrimage boat. We arrived to the docks in the port in Jaffa. We got to experience the port in Jaffa, but what does everyone do when they get to Jaffa? In ancient times, they would stay there. They would, eat some really delicious food, do all the fun cultural things that they would do in Jaffa. But then ultimately, they take that donkey ride or that train or the hike to get to the ancient city of Jerusalem, to get to the old city of Jerusalem. Now, on today's tour, before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge all the contributions of the various different places that I've pulled together some of the different images, and of course to the Google Maps, to the app Poly that really gives us this big, amazing background feel to where we are. And the tour that we're going to be doing today isn't just in the old city of Jerusalem, but it's of a very specific place in the old city of Jerusalem. And what is this place? We are going to the Temple Mount. This little rectangle that's just over here. Itzik and everyone, can you guys see the image that we've got over here of Jerusalem? Is everyone seeing it okay? All the amazing 360-degree view, right? Part of what's really fun about doing these virtual tours is we get to go and see things and see places that we never get to see in regular life even. When do you get to be, all the way above the Mount of Olives with a huge bird's eye view looking at the Temple Mount from above in the most beautiful possible setting that you could imagine. So welcome everyone to the old city of Jerusalem. Welcome to the holy city, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, the holiest city in the world, and one that is constantly debated about, it's one that's constantly talked about, especially today in the day of the peace treaty that was just signed today at the White House. So a lot of it is in the backdrop of everyone being interested in what goes on in Jerusalem. So what is this place, Jerusalem? So the old city of Jerusalem is around where my mouse is over here. There's this wall that you can see a little bit faint in the background. It's just over there. There's this wall that goes all the way around the old city of Jerusalem. We are going to be focused primarily today on this rectangle, this square. The route that we're going to be doing when we're going to be on the Temple Mount starts in the southwest corner. And then we're going to be going into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, into this black dome mosque that's over here. We're going to be heading over to the southeast corner of the Temple Mount. We're going to jump to the northeast corner, jump again over to the northwest corner, and then after that, we're going to be hanging out on the top of the platform by the golden dome of the rock, and then we're going to be going inside the dome of the rock over here. Now, in all of this, before we do all of that, I'm going to give a little bit of context about what Jerusalem is, what the Temple Mount is exactly, and not just about what there is today, but also about what was there. And much like the Jaffa tour, as we were pointing out before, much like the Jaffa tour, where in a way the theme of the Jaffa tour is about people coming together in Jaffa, the Temple Mount has this kind of preconceived notion that it's a place that people are always fighting over, that there's always this conflict, and you're not wrong to think of it as a place where there's a lot of conflict. But my goal in the next hour with you today is to show you that the Temple Mount shouldn't be a place where people butt heads and try to figure out who can grab what stone and claim that this stone is Jewish or this stone is Christian or this stone is Muslim. But my goal at the end of this tour is to maybe put a new twist on the Temple Mount, that because everyone fights over all of these stones, that it's created this sense of again, this dialogue between the three different religions, and that it's added to the holiness of the place. And that you'll get a sense of how big the Temple Mount is, and that there is enough space for all three religions to hang out in peace, if only that were the case in real life all the time. So let's get started and help to understand a little bit about what the Temple Mount is. So first of all, if you look all the way around us, you can see that Jerusalem, you just turn over, you just go to the other side of the hills. We are in the desert. We're basically right next to the desert. We're on the border straddling the Judean desert. You'd have the Dead Sea just over here. And then you already have the beginnings of the city of Jerusalem on this side. Now, the original core of Jerusalem was just this little tiny hill over here, where, oops, wrong image. Where if you look at this image, this is the original, what you call City of David, the original city of Jerusalem that existed during the time of the first temple, where it's just this little tiny town where David had his palace over here. And then eventually King Solomon, David's son, builds the temple up on the top of the hill. Now the temple's a little bit faded in the background because, and it's a little bit on purpose, because we don't exactly know what the first temple looked like. So I'm saying the first temple, what is this first temple thing? So just to give a sense of what the timeline of the temples are, is generally what we say is the first temple and the second temple is a little bit of a complicated situation. You have the first temple, which was made by King Solomon, according to the Bible, around the year 930 BCE. And this lasted until it was destroyed in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, where Jewish people to this day commemorate this day as Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av, which usually falls around the beginning of August or the end of July, where we commemorate this day of destruction of Jerusalem and specifically the destruction of the first temple. And then, according to Jewish tradition, 70 years later, the second temple is built by the Jews who come back from Babylon to Jerusalem. But the Jews who come back to Jerusalem didn't really have that much money, and the temple that they build isn't really such a great looking temple. And so the third temple, which is still called the second temple because it hadn't been destroyed, the temple essentially goes under a huge renovation by the Hasmoneans. The Hasmoneans are the heroes of the Hanukkah story, they're the Maccabees. So the Hasmoneans come in the 160s and they rebuild the temple and they make it much more glorious. They make it much more beautiful because they finally were able to kind of gather together a little bit of funds to make the temple beautiful again. But then the temple is renovated once more by the King Herod, who is a very controversial king in the history of the Jewish people, but one that definitely knew how to build, or at least knew how to instruct his slaves how to build things very well. And he builds starting in the year 20 BCE, he builds this huge, massive temple, which we're going to understand a little bit about what this huge building project Herod did was. But essentially, Herod builds the largest building in the Roman Empire, where when Herod builds the temple, which again is referred to as the second temple, but we know by this point this is already the fourth iteration of the temple. So when Herod builds the second temple again, it probably is the most famous building in the world. And the sad part about it is that it only lasts until the year 70 CE. In such a large building like this, it hadn't even been completely finished by the time it was destroyed. The Holy of Holies would have been finished, but there are still lots of stones that are found by archaeologists today that aren't fully shaped and not fully formed the way that Herod would have intended from when he started the project in the year 20 BCE. So let's take a look at essentially what Herod's temple looked like. So this is a sense of what Herod's temple would have been. You can see that There's kind of this little section that's on the southern end. You have the Holy of Holies that's on the middle of the Temple Mount, which we're going to get to, which is where the golden dome of the rock is to this day. And then on the northern end, there's a little fortress that's on the top. We're going to be getting to all these things while we go around the Temple Mount to this day. But I want to not just focus on what isn't there after it was destroyed in the year 70. I want to focus on what is there right now. So we're going to be focusing on those two things, what was there and what is there. And so what's interesting is what is there on the Temple Mount right now is you have these two large domes where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the largest mosque in all of Israel. And the Dome of the Rock over here is one of the most famous buildings in the world and possibly probably the most famous building in all of Israel. And it's actually not a mosque. This building is actually a shrine to the Temple of Solomon. But the question is asked by all of these historians and archaeologists of why the Temple Mount looks as it is today. Why is there this big open platform around the Dome of the Rock? Why are there domes? Why is this one gold? Why is this one black? What is the deal with what the Temple Mount looks like today? And one of the theories is that the Temple Mount was meant to, the Temple Mount as it looks today was meant to compete with Mecca. That when the Dome of the Rock is built in the year 690 and the Al-Aqsa Mosque is built in the year 670 after the Muslim conquest of Jerusalem, that it was built to compete with Mecca, the holiest site in the world for Muslims. And why was it built to compete with that? Because in the 7th century, at the beginning of Islam, there was essentially a war between the Muslims of the north that were based in Damascus and the Muslims that were in the south who were based in Saudi Arabia of today, in Mecca and Medina. And the ones that were based in Mecca and Medina didn't allow for the Muslims of Damascus to come and complete the Hajj, to make pilgrimage to Mecca, where it's the holiest day of the year for Muslims, and a task that every Muslim once in their life should come to Mecca and make pilgrimage and walk around this black cube that's known as the Kaaba, which is the holiest site in the world for Muslims. And so when these Damascus-based Muslims were not able to go to the Temple Mount, or were not able to go to the Kaaba, so they picked another holy site where Solomon is a prophet to Muslims. So they picked another holy site that they could go to, that they could walk around and perform some sort of Hajj. Another theory is that these domes, they're not really Muslim-style architecture. They're much more Christian-style architecture. They're Byzantine, if you will. And so maybe these domes were meant to compete with the most famous church of its day, the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. That if the Muslims come in the 7th century and conquer much of the world, they want people to know that they also have a building that is just as beautiful, if not more beautiful and more grand than the Hagia Sophia, the capital of the Byzantine world. Other historians, the ones that I think more this theory is probably the better theory, is that the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were meant to compete with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is just over here in the old city of Jerusalem, the holiest site in the world for Christians, which of course has its famous Byzantine Roman style dome that sits over Jesus's tomb, where Jesus was resurrected according to Christian tradition, and this spot that's over here where Jesus was put on the cross, where he was crucified. And so the theory is that when the Muslims come and conquer Jerusalem, that they want to build something that says, hey, when you come to visit Jerusalem, you have to know that it's a Muslim city and that it's not a Christian city. And the most beautiful building shouldn't be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but it should be the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And they actually allow for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to still be active and to still exist. And the Church of the Holy Sepulchre isn't destroyed for another few hundred years when a deranged leader from Egypt ends up coming and conquering Jerusalem. But we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be focusing again on the Temple Mount as it is today, what it is, and what it was. Before we go on, I wanted to take you to a really special site in Jerusalem. Because without this site, without this site, we wouldn't have access to the Temple Mount at all. And what this is over here, this is actually a JNF site that's called Ammunition Hill. And the Ammunition Hill is a really special place in the history of Israel, because in 1967, this was the most important battle for the conquering of East Jerusalem and for the old city of Jerusalem itself. Or if you look at a map of 1967 Jerusalem, where Jerusalem was divided between this area over here, which is yellow, which was Israel proper, and all this kind of pink shaded area, which is the area that was controlled by Jordan. And in 1967, when the battle breaks out between Jordan and Israel, most of it takes place over here in this place that's this kind of no man's land in the area that's known as the Armornet Sea, or the High Commission's Palace, in this area that's over here. But then Israel comes in, they defeat the Jordanians over here, then they have to go up to the northern part of the city, to this little square that's called Ammunition Hill, which was a very big stronghold of the Jordanians. And the battle that was fought here was incredibly, incredibly bloody. This was one of the most hard-fought battles of 1967. That was fought by the paratroopers in 1967. And once Ammunition Hill was conquered, then Israel could go and free up the island that was already under Israel's control on Mount Scopus. And then from Mount Scopus, Israel was able to go from the Mount of Olives towards the old city of Jerusalem and conquer the Temple Mount. Now you're going to be discussing Ammunition Hill a little bit later on tonight, and you're going to learn all about it, but you can see kind of just how beautiful of a place this is. And the most beautiful part for me of the whole story of Ammunition Hill, which you're going to get into all of that a little bit later on, was actually this little memorial that was placed on Ammunition Hill right after the battle, where the Israeli soldiers, they stuck a rifle in the ground and they put a sign in English on this gun, on the butt of the gun that was placed in the ground, that says, Army of Israel, Tzahal. Buried here are 17 brave Jordanian soldiers, June 7th, 1967. That even though this was the most hard-fought battle in 1967, where dozens of Israelis lost their lives and dozens of Jordanians lost their lives, and it was a terrible struggle where there was all of this miscommunication about what the battle was going to be, and it was in the middle of the night. There was lots of confusion and lots of injuries as well. But at the end of the battle, the Israeli soldiers stuck this rifle in the ground and honored the Jordanian soldiers who were killed in battle. Now, it wasn't as simple as how I just said it, because you can even see on the sign itself that some of the Israeli soldiers crossed out that word brave on this handwritten sign. So you can even see that in that moment, even when they wanted to memorialize the Jordanian soldiers, it wasn't totally accepted that we should memorialize these Jordanian soldiers. And so some of them didn't even really necessarily like that. But the most beautiful part about this is that this sign was saved, and the Jordanian soldiers were still buried here until 1993, when the peace accords were signed between Israel and Jordan. And Jordan sent a delegation to Ammunition Hill of veterans from this battle where they were able to honor those same fallen soldiers. So it's a really emotional moment in that kind of way. And for me, I'm very personally connected to Ammunition Hill because I served in the paratroopers when I was in the army in Israel, where as a paratrooper in the army, this is where you have your Beret Ceremony, where in order to earn my red beret, so I had to do a 65-kilometer march all through the night. 65 kilometers, I think, probably around like 35 miles or something like that. Maybe a little bit more, maybe 40. I don't actually, yeah, probably around like 35, 40 miles. And so this is where, after the big march that was all through the night, my parents had made it to Ammunition Hill and were waiting for me to arrive. We changed into our nicer clothes and we received in a ceremony our red berets to formally induct us into the paratroopers. So you can see me with another lone soldier that was just over here just a few years ago when I was a young little guy. Anyway, so you're going to learn all about Ammunition Hill later. Yeah, it's sick.
Just as an aside, I just want to say, Alon Wald, who is joining us after the hour, is actually the son of one of the paratroopers that got killed in the battle on Givat Moshe. And he was a baby. And it's connecting to your beautiful story. I have goosebumps. I have goosebumps now.
Wow. Wow, it's incredible. I'm sorry I won't be around to hear it. I'm sure it's going to be a really beautiful, So after the Battle of Ammunition Hill, the soldiers in 1967 make it to the Temple Mount. They conquer the Temple Mount without firing any gunshots. And then after that, go down to the Western Wall. But let's understand about what is up here on the Temple Mount. So again, we're going to be starting on the southwest corner. The reason why we're starting on the southwest corner is that if we were to come here in real life, as non-Muslims, the only entrance that we're allowed to go up to the Temple Mount is through this gate. It's on the other side of this little stone wall that's over here, which is known as the Mughrabi Gate. And you'd enter on the southwest wall. Now, on the southwest wall, this is one of a few different places on the Temple Mount that is, in a way, equally special to Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike, where, according to Christian tradition, it's from this corner over here that Jesus was tempted by the devil to jump off of a cliff, essentially. But then Jesus says no. Jesus refuses to be tempted by the devil. And for Jews, the southwest corner is especially relevant to the time period that we're in right now, where a stone was found that had been thrown off by the Romans by the Western Wall, on the southwestern side of the Western Wall, that has this inscription, Lebeit HaTkiyah. And what is this Lebeit HaTkiyah? It is the house of the shofar blowing, of blowing the horn, the ram's horn, the blowing of the shofar, which is what we're thinking about for just this week, this upcoming week. We're going to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, the new year, where we hear that shofar blast. This is the place where Jews would have been notified of the beginning of Shabbat and the end of Shabbat by a shofar blast. By the beginning of the new month, of the new moon, they would have been notified by a shofar blast. And to this day, the minaret that does the call to prayer, the first call to prayer, is done from this southwest corner, from this minaret that's over here. There's 4 minarets that adorn the Temple Mount, and this is where the first one that blasts its loud call to prayer. So this is the minaret, the Al-Fakhariya minaret. So again, it's this interesting, fun site that is holy to all 3 religions in that kind of way. And we're now standing outside of, we've moved from the southwest corner, we're now outside of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which has this really gorgeous, beautiful facade. If we spin ourselves around, you can see the Dome of the Rock that's just over here, and the beautiful Sabil, the fountain that is in between them where Muslims go to wash their feet. But let's go to places now that you wouldn't be able to go to in real life on the Temple Mount. Only Muslims at this point, are allowed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, again, you can see how huge this mosque is. You can see the carpet on the ground, which is pointing towards the south, is pointing towards Mecca, so people know their direction of prayer. You can see over here the mihrab, which is at the front of every mosque that directs the prayer towards Mecca, the holiest city in Islam. And again, as we mentioned yesterday, the most beautiful part of these mosques isn't just the outside of the beautiful domes on the outside, but on the inside of the dome, where you can see the beautifully ornate geometric patterns that you can see on the inside of the black dome of the rock. What once was the most beautiful part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque that would bring people far and wide to come and see was this structure over here, which is called the Minbar, where the Imam speaks from every Friday. But you can see this one is covered by plexiglass on the outside. But this Minbar is actually not the original Minbar. The original Minbar was actually this one, which was a Minbar that was built by Saladin the Great, who was the general who defeated the Crusaders in 1187 CE, and afterwards dedicated this Minbar to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it stayed here until 1969, when a deranged Australian tourist came into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and torched it and burnt it down. And now, what is left here is in a way a replica, but a not as really well done replica of what that minbar looked like. And since 1969, non-Muslims are not allowed to enter into the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Dome of the Rock out of fear that it might be destroyed. This is a really sad moment. You can see in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because it's just so large and carpeted and comfortable during the months of Ramadan when it is really hot, this is a place where Muslims from all over the old city of Jerusalem will come and pray, but also just to rest during the day. Just as a fun little interesting side note, is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and I'm going to mention why in just a second, is the area that's much more susceptible to earthquakes and has fallen over a few times over the centuries. And so the most recent time was in 1927, much of the Al-Aqsa Mosque was destroyed, and it had to be renovated and rebuilt. And all of these beautiful pillars that are over here, these granite and marble pillars, were actually donated by Benito Mussolini after the earthquake of 1927 to rebuild the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the reason why I bring that up is because those pillars, which essentially came from Rome to help build up the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it makes you think about, well, when the Second Temple was destroyed and Rome took all these treasures from the Second Temple and brought them to Rome. So it's just interesting to think that Rome gave something back to the Temple Mount to help rebuild one of the structures on the Temple Mount. So now we are here on the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount. Where we were before, we were standing up in the sky above the Mount of Olives, as you can see just over here, the really beautiful view. You can see the Hebrew University just far off in the distance over there. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? I know I've been talking a lot, but I want to make sure that everyone is still following. Am I speaking too quickly? Am I getting too excited? Are you guys enjoying so far? Is everything?
Very much so. I have a question about the topography. So in one of the first views, it showed a deep channel, a deep trough where there's a river or something below this area, and with very steep embankments. Could you kind of describe that a bit? Is this
Sure.
Is this on a quite elevated site?
So the topography is a really interesting thing that you bring it up. So here's a topographical map of Jerusalem. So the Temple Mount is this area that's over here. You have a very deep valley that's on this side of the Temple Mount of the original city of Jerusalem, and another deep valley that's on this side of the old city of Jerusalem. Now remember, the original city of Jerusalem is just this little hill. And the reason why this is the original part of Jerusalem, because the only water source in Jerusalem actually is a spring that's on this part of the hill. But then also, this hill, you would think of the Temple Mount as the highest mountain. You think that the Holy Temple will be on the highest mountain in the area, but it's actually the lowest of all of these mountains. All of these mountains that surround it are all higher than the Temple Mount structure, like where the Temple Mount is today. And that essentially adds an extra layer of defense for the Temple Mount because it's an extra layer of defense for the city of Jerusalem because it's surrounded by these deep valleys. So these hilltops, in ancient times, they would have just stationed a few soldiers on the tops of these hilltops, and that would have provided an extra wall around the city of Jerusalem, essentially. So that's why Jerusalem is where it is today. A little bit of interesting note is that the Mount of Olives, which is this mountain that's over here that we're standing above right now, is made of kirtan rock, chalk rock. While the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem and all of these mountains are made of limestone, which is harder rock, which makes it so that this area is very easy to dig into, but it's hard to build from those rocks. While Mount Moriah and the original city of Jerusalem and the old city of Jerusalem is made of limestone, which is much harder rock. So it's very easy to take out bricks and build yourself a house. So what's this mountain good for? This mountain is good for making a cemetery, and this mountain is good for making a city. So this is the Acropolis, and this is the Necropolis, where it's essentially the city of the dead. And this Mount of Olives is the most ancient active cemetery in the world, where there's evidence of people being buried in the Mount of Olives for 4,500 years. And it's the oldest active cemetery in the world where people are still buried here to this day. It is the holiest cemetery in the world for Jews, and also a very holy site for Christians and Muslims as well. It was the holiest cemetery in the world for Jews, which I'm going to get into that reason a little bit later on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, amazing. And thanks for asking. And everyone else, again, feel free to ask questions throughout the tour. I know we're already, it's just been so exciting in the tour that we're already even running short on time in that kind of way. Sorry, for some reason the screen is black. 1 second. Don't know why. There we go. Now we are back. Now I'm going to have to go through the next, what's that?
Never been there. What language is spoken in Israel? Many I know, but what is the main language? Someone mentioned Hebrew earlier.
Yes, so the language that's spoken by the official language of Israel is Hebrew. The second official language of Israel is Arabic. Around 30%, 20 to 30% of Israel's population is Arabic speaking as their native language. And there's also a lot of English in Israel too. You can get by speaking in English as well. So I'm going to kind of briefly go over the next little bit so we can make sure we can spend some time in the Dome of the Rock. So we're on the southeastern corner that's over here, where what did I want to show you specifically that's over here is how the Temple Mount was constructed. Where the original mount, you can see Mount Moriah, which is over here, where the temple would have been put on this mountain. Now, originally, the temple only would have fit on this little spot that's over here, because again, it kind of slopes down the mountain. But Herod, when he's rebuilding the second temple, Herod says, I don't want to build a little beautiful temple on the top of the hill, as it once was. I want to build the largest building in the whole Roman Empire. I need to take up this whole hilltop. And how does he do that? He makes these huge walls that go all around that hilltop and essentially fills in the empty space around these walls with big arches. And then on top of those arches, he puts a platform. And on that platform, the temple can sit. Now, the Dome of the Rock, as it stands today, where the temple once stood, sits on bedrock, while the Al-Aqsa Mosque over here sits on arches. It's essentially floating in the air, which is why this is the area that is much more susceptible to the once-a-century earthquakes that rock the land of Israel, while the Dome of the Rock has lasted and stood as it is since the 690s when it was built. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque, even though it was built in 670, has fallen over and has been rebuilt a couple times over. But the Dome of the Rock is actually the oldest Muslim building that is the oldest complete Muslim building that is still standing in the world. So it's a pretty cool fact in that kind of way. Underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the archaeologists found all of these huge arches that were under here. Now, the archaeologists of modern times weren't the first people to discover these big arches. The Crusaders, who came and conquered Jerusalem in the year 1099, also find these arches. Now, when they see these arches, even though we know they were built by Herod in order to support this new Temple Mount structure, they see these arches and they say, oh, this must be where King Solomon kept all of his horses. And so they rename it Solomon's Stables. And they call it Solomon's Stables to essentially justify building a palace in where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is. This becomes the palace of the Crusaders. And the Dome of the Rock becomes the church during that time, during the during the 12th century. And the king kept his horses in these underground stables that were over here. Now, when the Crusaders come to Jerusalem in 1099, it is the first time that Christians come to the Temple Mount and beautify, make the Temple Mount holy for Christians. Where before that, the Temple Mount was essentially ignored, to say the least, and in a way, by the Roman tradition starting from the 4th century, the Temple Mount had literally been turned into a garbage dump by the Byzantine Christians in order to say to the Jewish people that this is not where the temple is anymore. The real temple is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that is where the holiness resides. This place has been destroyed. It is a garbage dump. We will only allow you to go up one day of the year, which is not Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. They allowed Jews to go up during Tisha B'Av, the day that they mourned the destruction of the temple. And so the Crusaders that came forgot that old tradition, that old Christian tradition of Christians not beautifying the Temple Mount. And that comes into play a little bit later on. Now, I'm just going to mention this site briefly, because this is a site that is equally holy to Muslims, Jews, and Christians again as well, which is called the Golden Gate, where according to all three religions, the Messiah will come through this gate over here, which is now blocked up. This is a famous gate, one of the most famous gates of Jerusalem, which is the gate that leads from the Mount of Olives, where according to Jewish tradition and Christian tradition, the Messiah or Jesus will be going down or ride down on their donkey down from the Mount of Olives and through this gate. This gate was blocked up in the 1400s, but that only added to the mystique of what the Messiah is going to do when the Messiah comes to Jerusalem and not just walks through this gate, but breaks through the gate of the Golden Gate in order to declare the Messianic age. And again, because we're on a virtual tour, we get to go actually inside the Golden Gate, which is off limits to non-Muslims. So only Muslims are allowed to go in here, which is this beautiful prayer space that's over here that essentially is waiting for the various versions of the Messiah, depending on the three different religions, where again, it's the site that is equally holy to all three religions. And now we are on the northern wall of the Temple Mount, where, because we're a little bit short on time, I'm only going to point out one little place where all around the Temple Mount, there's a series of domes, in a way like a series of memorials that are all over the Temple Mount. This dome is the one that is my favorite dome. It's called the Dome of Solomon, which is dedicated to Solomon, who built the first temple, but also Suleiman the Magnificent, the great builder of the 1500s, the Ottoman builder of the 1500s, who essentially re-beautified the Temple Mount after years that it was, in a way, left abandoned. Now, this dome was built in the 12th century, and it's built from a Muslim tradition that says that when the Jews went to Babylon, when they came back from Babylon, some of the Jews who went to Babylon in the first place brought with them some of the stones from that first temple to ancient Babylon. And then 70 years later, when they came back to rebuild the second temple, they brought those stones back to rededicate them to the rebuilding of the temple. And this dome over here, according to Muslim tradition, sits above some of these stones from that first Jewish temple. Now, once this became a Muslim tradition, and this is going to be a theme that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in a second, this is a Muslim tradition. So Jews heard this tradition and said, oh, that's a really great tradition, and they took it on themselves as well. And once you have a tradition that's Muslim and Jewish in Jerusalem, so Christians obviously, of course, adopt that same tradition. And again, you have a site that is equally holy to all three religions. And now we're getting closer to the Dome of the Rock. Now, again, we have these ideas of shared traditions that take place on the Dome of the Rock, where next to the Dome of the Rock, you have this beautiful dome that's known as the Kubat Al-Miraj, which, according to Muslim tradition, it's from this dome that's over here that Muhammad goes up to heaven to debate with God of how many times a day Muslims should pray. But what's interesting about this dome is that it wasn't originally built by Muslims. This was actually built by Crusaders as a little baptismal pool that was set to the outside of the Dome of the Rock, which you have to remember during the Crusader period was a church. And what's really interesting about this dome, if you look really closely at the top of the dome, you can see these really ornate, little tiny Gothic pillars and arches that are over here. And again, it's this really fun, it's a Christian tradition, a Christian dome that was built that ends up being associated with a Muslim historical event. The other place I want to take you to is this one that's over here, this dome, which doesn't really look that special, but it's this dome over here that has huge ramifications for Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount. For most Jewish visitors to the temple, or for religious Jewish visitors who come to the Temple Mount, they will not stand on this area where we are right now. And they will not go into the Dome of the Rock over here. Now, why is that? Because according to Jewish tradition, only the high priest would be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, and only priests would be able to go in the area just outside the Holy of Holies. And so generally, religious Jews would not go into this area out of fear of not being in a place where they would have been allowed to be during the time of the temple. However, this dome over here makes it difficult for religious Jews to go up even to this section of the Temple Mount. Now, why is that? It's because this dome has a name in Arabic called Kubat Al-Laluach, which means the Dome of the Tablets, which started to ring a little bit to historians that, oh, why would you call it Dome of the Tablets? Is there a chance that maybe the tablets, that the Ten Commandments, the Holy of Holies, was actually here? And what's interesting about this dome is that it is above the only area of bedrock that you can actually see on the Temple Mount other than inside the Dome of the Rock. That maybe there's an ancient tradition that predates even this dome, which was built in the 1500s, that maybe there's a tradition that predates this dome, that the Temple Mount, the Holy of Holies, was actually further north than we think. That maybe it's a little bit further north than the Dome of the Rock. So out of respect for that possibility, So religious Jews will not stand in the spot that we are in right now. And now we're looking at the most beautiful view of the Dome of the Rock, which is next to this mysterious dome that's over here, which is called the Kubat Al-Sisla, or the Chain Dome, which is this mysterious building that's over here, which, why do I want to bring this up? We don't actually know what this dome was built for, other than that this dome over here is actually in the geometric center of the whole Temple Mount complex. That if you look at where the first temple was, this is a model of what the first temple was. Again, we're looking at it from this angle. This is a model of what Solomon's temple would have looked like. This is a close-up view of what Herod's temple would have looked like. So the Kubat al-Sisla, that mysterious dome, is probably a bit over here in the courtyard, while the Dome of the Rock is more where the Holy of Holies would have been under the time of Herod the Great. But what do I want to do over here? I wanted to actually spin around with you and look way off in the distance at the Mount of Olives. Because off in the distance, exactly opposite the Dome of the Rock, is this beautiful church, which is known as the Dominus Levi, which, according to Christian tradition, is the place where Jesus wept over the future destruction of the Temple Mount, of the temple. And this church was designed in the 1930s by the famous Catholic architect Antonio Barlucci, who built the church to design to look like a teardrop, with a view, instead of having a mosaic or a painting in the backdrop, the view itself is that window that overlooks the Temple Mount, that overlooks the Dome of the Rock. Now, originally, the Dome of the Rock was actually a black dome. Some of you may remember it actually as a black dome. It only became a golden dome in the 1960s, 1963 to be exact, to kind of give it an extra layer of beauty. So originally it was this black lead dome, but now it is a golden dome. Actually, the person who did the renovation on the Dome of the Rock, who made it gold, was actually Osama bin Laden's father, believe it or not, just as a fun little kind of tidbit in that kind of way. It's just like a really interesting thing to talk about. But what I wanted to mention again about this Kubat al-Sisla, the chain dome, is that it was such an important and beautiful dome that when the Knights Templar set up their base here during the Crusader period, their seal had that dome as part of their seal of the Crusader Knights that came to here. But now, again, we're getting closer to the end of our tour. We haven't even gone into this mysterious and beautiful Dome of the Rock. And here we are. Now we're inside the Dome of the Rock. Again, non-Muslims are not allowed to enter where we are right now. This place that only Muslims are allowed to enter into. You can see this little red little holy site that's over here, where this little site over here, according to Muslim tradition, is a place where some of Muhammad's hair is kept. Some of his beard hair is actually, according to Muslim tradition, inside this little dome that's over there. And right above us, we have the interior of the Golden Dome of the Rock, which has this stunningly ornate, beautiful geometric patterns that are over here, with some of the stunning Arabic calligraphy, which, as I mentioned on the tour in Yafo, as the tour in Jaffa, that Muslim artists generally express themselves in geometric patterns because they weren't able to express themselves by drawing landscapes or animals or people and different things like that. Now, what's beautiful about the interior of the Dome of the Rock is that looking at the Dome of the Rock, is that it incorporates 3 different types of Muslim architecture and design, where some of the Dome of the Rock on the interior is designed with Ottoman, Turkish influence. Some of it is designed with Persian influence, and some of it is designed with kind of more Babylonian or Arabian influence. So in a way, it unites the 3 different places where 3 different Muslim traditions of where of where they get kind of their art and architecture from. And we have a view from above over here of the foundation stone, which according to Jewish tradition is this stone over here where the Holy of Holies was kept, where the high priest would only be allowed once a year on Yom Kippur to go into this area. You can see that over the years it's been kind of hacked away a little bit. Jewish tradition where the world was formed from this stone on Rosh Hashanah, on the beginning of the new year, which is again the new year, which is just starting in just a couple of days in the Jewish calendar. So rock underneath the foundation stone, which originally would have looked a little bit like this. Now, why am I bringing this up over here, this little cave that's underneath? Is because here we have, again, these overlapping traditions of the three different religions that all influenced each other. Where under the stone actually started a crusader, a Christian tradition, that this is where the Holy of Holies was, and not above ground, but actually underground. Now, why did they start that tradition? Because the holiest site in a Catholic church is always underneath the church itself, is in the place called the crypt. And so when they saw the foundation stone, they saw there was a little tiny cave underneath. And they said, oh, if there's a little cave underneath this stone, that must mean that that is where the Holy of Holies was kept. Because churches that we're familiar with in Europe, that is where the crypt is. And so they associated this as the place. Oh, someone have a question? I just hear a little bit of noise in the background. Okay, great. Oh. Can you figure out how to mute? Can everyone make sure they're on mute? Okay, great. Everyone is on mute. Okay, great. Sorry about that, everyone. So, where was I? This started a Catholic tradition that the Holy of Holies was kept underground over here. But once you have this Christian tradition that the Holy of Holies was kept here, so a Jewish and Muslim tradition started here as well, that this is where the Holy of Holies was kept, and therefore this was the holiest site on the Temple Mount. Later on, as the centuries went by, the Jewish tradition of this being the site of the Holy of Holies was lost again, and the tradition of the temple, the Holy of Holies being above ground, came back into vogue. But it is really interesting to think that this is the place where this is the site that was holy to all three religions once more. And the last final thing that I wanted to mention with you guys over here as we're finishing up our tour is on the roof of a building in the Christian quarter. We've now left the Temple Mount, and we're on this roof that overlooks basically the whole old city of Jerusalem, on a roof that's of a place called the Austrian Hospice, where we can see over here the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in the world for Christians. You can see the Jewish quarter off in the distance over here with the dome of the Chorva synagogue. And you can see over here, of course, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the northern side of the Temple Mount over here. Now, many people, when they come to Jerusalem, they see Jerusalem as not as it is today, but as it once was. They see the Temple of Herod over here, and they're placing this image onto what it is today. Some people look at Jerusalem and they see this more pastoral image of a Jerusalem that once was, and not the modern city, but they see kind of the older Temple Mount as it once stood. And some people see it as it is today. And I hope that over the course of the tour, we've got to see all these different views, and all from the different viewpoints from all over the different angles of the Temple Mount. Now, what I want to end with you, the message I want to end with you, is actually from a Canadian folk song called One Tin Soldier, which this song is a really, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the song One Tin Soldier, but I always think about Jerusalem when I hear this song, where it's about, again, listen children to a story that was written long ago about a kingdom on a mountain and the valley folk below. And there's this battle over the treasure that is somewhere in this mountain. And after this bloody, terrible battle, you think about Ammunition Hill as well, where it's essentially this battle over Jerusalem where so much blood is shed, where they make it to the Temple Mount and they find this stone and they look beneath it and they find this note that says, peace on earth. And that is the treasure of Jerusalem. And the irony of the city of Jerusalem is that Jerusalem means Ir Shalom, the city of peace. And the irony is that it's a city that, unfortunately, over its 3,000-year history, has known very few years of actual peace, even more so than Jaffa, which was ravaged by war, as we talked about yesterday. And I hope that over our tour of the Temple Mount, that we've been able to find that note that says peace on earth, that there are these places that Muslims, Christians, and Jews can all celebrate and pray together and see that all these places are holy to equally holy, or maybe it doesn't even matter if it's equally holy, just holy to all these religions all together. And that the real treasure is that in the future, we won't have to have terrible bloody battles like Ammunition Hill, that we can all go up to the Temple Mount and be together in peace and in harmony and holiness. And with that, I wanted to thank you all so much for coming to this tour today in Jerusalem. We're going to be doing another tour tomorrow. We're going to be leaving the center of the country. We're going to be going all the way up to the north to the Galilee, and we're going to be doing the sea-to-sea hike all together. A totally different vibe than the tours that we've been doing up until now, which have been focused on one place. Now we're going to be going all over the country, going to the north of Israel, and filled with songs and lots of, not just listening to my voice, but going to have lots of fun songs and an interactive experience as well. And with that, I'm happy to stay on for another few minutes for a couple of questions. Again, my name is Josh. My last name is Hartu. If any of you wanted to learn a little bit more about me and the tours that I do, I have around 15 other different tours that I give. You can go to my website, hartuv.com, HARTUV tours.com. You can feel free also to leave me a rating on TripAdvisor or on Facebook at Hartuv Tours, or you can just send me an email, josh@hartuvtours.com. But again, I'm going to be with you for the next few days, and I'll give you all that information a little bit later on. So with that, I'm happy to stay on and answer any of your questions if you have. And thank you. I had a really lovely time.
Thank you so much for a great job.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I see. Thank you, Josh. It's pretty amazing. And I just want to make sure that you all know, I know that Lee and Susan know that when Jewish National Fund started this, tour when the Corona struck us a couple of months ago, one of the main reasons is to not only keep you connected, but there is a very important economic reason for this. So many people, including the guides like Josh, were simply out of work because of Corona, because there's no tourism. So that was one of our ways of stimulating it. And actually, your fees, did not go to us. They're all going to support the fantastic guides and help them through this, this time. And so we really appreciate it. And I wanted you to know that. Does anyone have any questions for John?
Who administers the entire area that we've just seen? How is it administered? What group is in charge of it? I can't hear.
Sorry, it's an excellent question. Sorry, I muted myself. Sorry, it's a really, really amazing question. Basically, it's a bit of a complicated mess. After 1967, Israel gave religious authority of the Temple Mount to the Jordanians, what's called the Waqf, which is like the, in a way, like the, and for lack of a better term, like the religious property managers of Jordan. So they control what goes on the Temple Mount. And since the Oslo Accords and the peace agreement with Jordan in the early 90s, so kind of more control in a way was given to the Jordanians over the top of the Temple Mount. And it's all kind of overseen by the Americans as well. And it's the people that do security, to make it more complicated, the security on the Temple Mount is done by the Israeli police. So there's a lot of different things involved in who runs and who controls and who's, doing things up on the Temple Mount. So, and it makes for a bit of a complicated mess sometimes.
I'll bet. Thank you.
No problem. Are there any other questions?
Josh, thank you
Yes.
so much. It was amazing. Only crazy Israelis like you and Alon, who is standing by, will be willing to wake up in the middle of the night and lead us through such really beautiful sights. And we'll see you tomorrow, and as you said, in a totally different area. I really appreciate you doing this.
All right, I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good afternoon for you guys and a good night for me. I'm going to go back to sleep. Mwah. It was a pleasure being with you all, and I'll see you all tomorrow on our big hike up north. Everyone has to make sure to bring sunscreen and a hat. Okay, so don't forget to bring sunscreen and a hat and a bottle of water, of course. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Good people, let's take like a 5-minute break. Alon is already with us. 3 o'clock in the morning, crazy Israelis, but let's take 5 minutes and come back in 5 minutes. And here, you don't want to miss it. It's an incredible story. And Alon, Josh prefaced a little bit. Apparently, Josh was a lone soldier from Canada. He served in the Tzanchanim, the paratroopers. And so he said how important that was for him. And then I mentioned just a little bit to him about your story. And it's incredible how everything connects. So we'll see you in 5 minutes.
No problem. I just want to make sure that my display can be uploaded. Just a minute. Can you see it, Itzik? Okay. No problem. מה שלומך?
אני בסדר גמור. I'm good. אני רק הולך לקחת, לשתות משהו. I'm going to drink something and then I'm going to come back.
בסדר גמור.
All right, all right. I think we have everyone back. Mr. Pendle is not here, and so we'll just wait for them to come back. I see that Susan is not back yet. There we go. Hi, Shoshana. All right. I think that Alon, our guest for this part, will do a good enough job. So I don't really need to introduce him because he has all the story within his own personal story and what he does now. However, I just want to put it in the context of, again, Jewish National Fund and what we're doing. Givat HaTachmoshet, or Ammunition Hill in English, is part of quite a few heritage sites that Jewish National Fund helps maintain, support, and grow with the idea that a nation without its past doesn't have a future. And knowing the past is really, really, really important. And I have to say that for me, born and raised in Israel, living now in the United States, these tours and actually, since I started working for Jewish National Fund, one of the main important personal growth that I had was really to gain perspective over what I thought I knew about not only my heritage, but other people's heritage, and the connection, the connectivity between so many heritages, and especially within Israel, such a tiny country that really has so much influence over the years on the entire world. And I think today, with the signing of the peace treaties and maybe the beginning of a new era in the Middle East, the story that Alon and the story of other sites that we help maintain is even more important than before, because as I said, really not knowing the history, without history, we don't have the future. So Alonchik, my good friend, is here. I appreciate you coming on so late at night, and take it away.
Okay, so first and foremost, thanks for having me. Secondly, are you ready for some Israeli accent now? I listened to Josh, it was amazing to listen to him. It surely is not our comfort zone to talk about things which have so many dimensions in 2 dimensions of this new media. But this is the way, this is the outcomes of the COVID-19 ordeals, and we'll try to do our best. And I feel very comfortable because some of the people here I know, and I'll try to squeeze a lifetime of me searching for meaning in my nation's purpose and my own purpose. I'll try to squeeze it to the next 15 or 20 minutes. The end of the story you just heard, Har HaBayit, the Holy Mountain, was actually the end of the story of the 6-day war. Now, I'm not going to give you an historical presentation. I'm going to share with you, indeed, my own story. The past 54 years of our nation is the past 54 years of my life. I'm a fully grown mensch, 54 years old. I'm going to throw amazing words to the air, but try to use your imagination, because the beginning of my story, I was a small baby. I was a 10-month baby. I did not understand the notions and the ideas and the words like camaraderie and bravery and commitment to a mission, and war and Zionism and the West Wall and Jerusalem. I didn't even understand naive, simple words like father and death. I lost my own dear father at the 6-day war. in the pivotal battle at Ammunition Hill that paved the way to the Holy Mountain, to the reunification of Jerusalem. And from whenever I remember myself, Ammunition Hill is actually my childhood playground. I was running in an amazing maze of 300 meters of trenches and 40 bunkers that were kept intact exactly as my father and his friends, the reservist paratroopers of the IDF, found them when they collided against the best from the other side, the Jordanians, legionnaires. They fought for 4.5 hours and against all odds came out victorious. Now I'm going to upload a presentation so you'll be able to see at least what I'm talking about. And the beginning of the story was indeed the 6-day war. I believe I see some of you, you must remember the 6-day war better than I do. I was 10 months. But to sum up a long presentation in English about the 6-day war, the beginning of the war, 2 weeks before the war started, President Nasser, the mighty president of the Egyptian nation, screamed all over the media, available media, then it was only the radio and TV a little bit, that he's going to come to Israel leading 4 Arab armies and demolish the Israel entity. He screamed all over the media, I'm going to kill you Jews, I'm going to throw you to the sea, I'm going to finish whatever Hitler could not do. Israel then was a very narrow country. These are the leftovers of the 48 Independence War. And the Israel nation could not wait to be butchered. And our government made a resolution decision and sent actually all of our combat aviators very low over the Sinai Peninsula towards Egypt. And within 45 minutes, demolished all the airplanes of the Egyptian army on the ground. And within 2 hours, this preemptive strike made us involved in 3 fronts: a war against the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Syrians in the Golan Heights in the north. And a small, stubborn, amazing nation, within 6 days, changed the Middle East the way we know it today, for the better or for the worse, but it was something not even one nation in the modern era could achieve. Within 6 days, we returned to the Holy Mountain, reunited Jerusalem, and came out victorious indeed against all odds. Now, at the north side of Jerusalem, you can see it, just a minute. You can see it on the right side map. You can see a place, I'll mark it here. This is Ammunition Hill. Whoever controls Ammunition Hill actually controls the 2 sides of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was divided as from 1948 until 1967 to 2 Jerusalems, the Jordanian side and the Israeli side. These were the leftovers of the Independence War, when nobody could decide who owns Jerusalem, who occupies Jerusalem, who controls Jerusalem. 2 generals from the both sides met and chopped the city with a pen, 8.5 kilometers to 2 cities. This was the beginning of the 6-day war. And on the north side of Jerusalem, there was a stronghold named Ammunition Hill. It was 300 meters from the Israeli border, and it was manned by the Jordanian legionnaires tribe, Bedouin tribe, El Hussein. These guys were the best of the other side. They were more afraid than King Hussein, than they were afraid of death. And this is actually marks part of the ridge that controls the north side of Jerusalem. My father and his friends, the paratroopers, stormed inside and indeed broke the spirit of these guys, took over this ridge, and this resulted in a resolution 2 days afterwards of our government. If this is what the paratroopers can achieve, let's seize the moment. Let's enter the old city of Jerusalem. It was a great risk to collide against millions of Muslims from all over the world, but it couldn't be helped. This was the timing, the perfect timing, and it was done. Now, to load the resolution, Ammunition Hill, until today intact, is being kept by Ammunition Hill management. Indeed, the past 9 years, JNF really helps us to maintain it and to preserve it and to add so many other layers of the story. But the beginning of my story was the story of a carpenter, 32 years old guy in Kfar Saba, city of Kfar Saba. Rami Vald is my father. He was the love of the life of my mother. He was a proud father to a newborn son. He was a carpenter. He was a civilian. You need to understand, you guys, that in any full-scale war that falls on our heads, the past 72 years of our existence, we were facing about 6 wars like this. The majority of the fighting units are not the enlisted young guys. If you come to Israel, you see them all over the streets. This is the IDF, indeed one of the best armies in the world. But they are not enough to collide against 4 Arab armies in 3 long fronts. Whenever there is a full-scale war, we need to summon our reservists. And who are they? Carpenters, grocery shop owners, lecturers, first grooms, proud young fathers who have to make time and again when the nation needs them, this click in their mind, shifting from being a father and a lover to a fighter. And the context needs to be understood. This is not a Spartan nation. This is Israel. We worship peace and life. We do not breed our kids and sons to become martyrs. And I'm talking to you about a lifetime of me trying to understand the minute my father received this horrible knock on the door and his friends from the army mentioned to him, there's a war behind the corner. You are also a combat engineer specialist. We need you. Come. Where does it come from? This power to do this and leave your wife, your career, your son, your personal welfare for the greater good. Does it come with the ranks, with the uniforms? No, it doesn't. It comes from something which is embedded in each and every one of these guys who made the ultimate sacrifice. And my father, 2 weeks before the war started, was summoned to the orchards of city of Rehovot to be prepared for this war, because the paratroopers are indeed until today considered to be the spearhead of our forces. Each and every one of these guys resemble the story of the liberation of Jerusalem, because when the war started, the enlisted young army was rushing toward the Sinai Peninsula to confront the Egyptians, was rushing toward the Golan Heights in the north to confront the Syrian army. And when the third front, the Jordanian front, the Jerusalem front was opened, the chief of staff has nobody but 3 brigades of civilians to allocate to Jerusalem. And one of them indeed was my father. They were preparing to this preemptive strike. And one morning of the 5th of June, 1967, there was an order. Hop on the buses, you need to go to Jerusalem. If a war starts there, the Jordanian side will kill all the Jerusalem inhabitants of the Israeli side. My father was a combat engineer specialist. He was one of the first to understand they have 5 hours to get prepared and rush toward Jerusalem. The first instinct when he heard this was to take a jeep along with his 2 good friends. One of them is alive until today, and drive 20 minutes to the place my mother was with me at the apartment of my grandfather and grandmother. The people of Israel were terrified for 2 weeks because Nazis were supposed to come and kill us all. My grandmother and my mother said to me, we're actually digging trenches in front of the house. When your father left, she decided, when my father left for the preparation of war, she decided to go to my granny's and grandfather's house. And my father knew there are 20 minutes from the preparation place next to Rehovot. In Israel, things are so small, the distances are so short. He had to say goodbye. And he drove with the jeep to the apartment. And my mother says, out of nowhere, there was a knock on the door, and your father appears wearing this camouflage uniform. This is his uniform behind me. I kept it for all these years. He didn't give any explanation. He couldn't say anything. It was a secret. He took you in his arms, and he sniffed your head like he loved to do from whenever you were born. He hugged you deeply, and he walks towards your grandfather. And my grandfather said to me, your father comes to me with you in his arms. He gives you to me and said to me, God, my son. I know from his eyes, he wanted to say something, but it was a secret. He couldn't say anything. Why did he come? My mommy said, your father looked intact. He was so strong and big, wearing these uniforms, like nobody could harm him. And as fast as they popped and came, they left without giving any explanation. And this is a gesture that has to do with who we are. Because my father and his friends were not machines of war. They needed us. They needed this last goodbye. I don't know if when he rushed towards the ammunition hill stronghold, if I was an asset on his shoulder or a burden. If he thought about me, I will never know. But in Israel, front and the civilians are so connected to each other. He had to sniff my head for the last time. and went away to war. And the next day, he was killed while paving the way to Ammunition Hill, using his skills and practically with his friends saving Israel. These guys, his friends, many of them are alive until today. Some of them are 76, some of them are 83, were all reservists. 2 weeks before, they were civilians. And they knew each other so well. Some of them knew each other from the Independence War, from the Palmach, from the 56 campaign. Time and again, when the nation needed them, they called them. Now, after 2 weeks of preparations, after a whole 2 weeks of being terrified on the edge of annihilation, within 6 days, these guys tripled the size of Israel, made an epic triumph, and tens of thousands of Jewish people were celebrating in front of the Kotel. All over the Jewish diaspora, all over the world, people were marveling the reunification of Jerusalem. Crying, chanting, praying all over the world. It was something unbelievable. Try to understand the shift between edge of annihilation, 2 weeks of preparation, 6 days of a very short war, and everybody's celebrating. In the middle, 182 bereaved families were stuck. Nobody could deal with them. Their friends, their brothers, their comrades in arms, their uncles and fathers paid the ultimate sacrifice. Nobody could deal with them now because the government, the Minister of Defense were all part of the celebration, justified celebration. The only guys who bothered to understand they could not wait to deal with the families that needed them now were the friends of my father. 100 from the people who were killed in Jerusalem were the paratroopers. These guys knew each other from the villages, from the kibbutzes, from the Palmach. The wives knew each other. The parents knew each other. It was a family when they entered the war. Now they had to deal with their friends' families. And a day after the war ended, they decided spontaneously they're going to leave the celebrations. They met at the apartment of Dr. King, the admired doctor of the brigade, who saved lives with his medics and doctors 2 and 3 and 4 days ago. And they divided the families between themselves. And a day afterwards, there was a knock on the door of my mother's place in Kfar Saba. My father and mother, he was killed for 3 days already. And 10 salt of the earth, amazing paratroopers, now civilians once again stepped inside. My mother hardly remembers anything. I was a 10-month baby, what do I know? But they entered inside, they pointed at me and they said to my mother, maybe Alonchik, this is my nickname, lost a father, but here 10 alternative fathers, uncles, friends, he will never step alone anymore. Now, this vow, these words, this promise resonated in dozens of other apartments all over Israel. In the kibbutzes, in Jerusalem, in the south and the north, they came to the families, saying to them, we are here for you. Now, you need to understand, I can talk to you for hours about the wartime, but while doing this spontaneously, without an order, when the instinct is to be at the celebrations because everybody admired them, pointed at them, you are the liberators of Jerusalem. Making a decision to approach the families, they implemented the same values I stand for today. They implemented the same values Israel stands for. They implemented the same values that led them to be victorious against all odds. Camaraderie, bravery, commitment to a mission, to your friends, leadership, creativity. These words, these values do not belong to wartime. They do not belong to the trenches of Ammunition Hill. They do not belong to the IDF. And to that extent, they do not belong to the Jewish people. They belong to civilians who choose to implement them. And these guys who are now, you can see them over the photos, were civilians when they came to my mommy and said to her that we are going to be in charge of your son. He will never step alone anymore. And this is a great lesson to understand the spirit of our nation. These guys never left me. You know, I couldn't care less for titles. I couldn't care less if it was somebody that led me all my life. He was an uncle or a father or a substitute father. Whenever I needed them, whenever me and all the other orphans of the 6 Day War needed them, they were there for us. Elementary school, I'm talking about bar mitzvahs, I'm talking about at the graveyard, at the Mount Herzl, the graveyard, the tomb of my father. I'm talking about getting married. I'm talking about going to the army. I'm talking about my wife giving birth to the first daughter. Somebody was there leading me, guiding me. And from them, without even knowing it, I created a puzzle of how might my father look like. From them, small gestures, mimics, values. I wanted to know my father. I wanted to understand. And I can tell you honestly that at the age of 8, I was angry with my father. Why did he leave me? Didn't he love my mother and myself? He was a civilian. Why did he go to the war? I needed answers because he was absent, but he was so present in my life. He was connected to some great legacy of the liberators of Jerusalem. I wanted to know, where does it all come from? And these guys gave me the answers. These guys gave me the background, and from them, I created the figure of my father. And I know him today. I'm so proud of his deeds. And I know today that these guys, same as my father, couldn't do anything else. Whenever our nation needed them, they came and they did the best they could do. About 13 years ago, these guys, in this truthful way that led me all my life, came to me once again and said to me and to my brothers and sisters forever, we are 80 years old. We will not be here tomorrow. It is your time. Please come under the stretcher and become our voice. And 13 years ago, I became committed to what is going on in Ammunition Hill, which is indeed an amazing place that talks not only about death and sacrifice and battlefield whereabout, it talks about values of our nation. Because 13 years ago, we understood that if our fathers, 99% of their lives were human beings, family members, lovers, civilians, we cannot focus again and again only on the last 60 seconds of their lives. They were indeed great, amazing heroes, but in order for you to understand who we are and what do we stand for, you need to understand that these people, first and foremost, were human beings. But when I'm talking about values, these guys, until today, we summon them once again to Ammunition Hill. Their vest, I fought in Jerusalem in 1967 on their chests and their backs, and they are now like grandfathers, coming again and again to meet you guys when you come from all over the world, surely from Israel, and they are talking to you as grandfathers, as civilians, about their memories, about their fears. But I see that there are some women here, some grandmothers, mothers. So I want to address to another person that led me all my life, which is my mother. She is alive until today. She's the rock of my life. I love her so much. But in order to understand to the full extent who we are as a nation, my mother did not know that she is as brave as each and every one of these guys. I started the story when I was 10 months. Now I'm 54. At the age of 40, I was summoned to Ammunition Hill to become an educator. Another age in my life so important for me to understand and to share with you, the age of 17, when the army knocks on my door. Most of us go to the army. At the age of 17, there was a knock on my door. What are you going to do? 18 behind the corner. And I wanted to be a paratrooper. I wanted to know my father all my life. This is my time to become a paratrooper and serve my nation. I wanted to sweat like him. I wanted my fathers, who led me all my first years, to be proud of me. But in Israel, such an amazing nation, we protect the bereaved families. And if somebody for first relation dies in combat, his successor, younger brother or son, cannot go by law to a combat unit to become fighters. We go to the army, and you can be very useful to your nation, doing things in medics, intelligence, or other stuff, but they prevent you from doing so. The only way for me to become a paratrooper was to use an annex in the law, bypass the law, use my legal guardian. And you guys, 99% of our life, 99% of the time, the legal guardian are our private, humble, dear mothers. At the age of 17, being a stupid, egoistic boy, I did not know what I'm loading on the shoulders of my mother. I'm confronting her, Mommy, please, there's an option for you to sign a waiver to the nation to allow me to become whoever I want to be. It's on your shoulders. In other words, I didn't say to my mother like this. I'm saying to my mommy, gamble your sanity in my life. It's on your shoulders. A mother that looks into her son's eyes in a situation like this and saying to him, okay, I'm going to sign the waiver. She becomes this instant as brave as each and every one of the guys I can talk to for hours about their deeds in combat. But in order to give you another layer of understanding of our nation and the values we stand for. A mother that looks into her son's eyes in a situation like this, saying to him, I do not care, hate me all your life, do not speak to me ever again, you'll be alive. I do not sign the waiver. She is as brave. And in Israel, we do not judge a mother that said yes, we do not judge a mother that said no. I will never forget me confronting my mother. Some of my friends said they were screaming on their mothers, offending them. I will never forgive you, have to sign. I love my mother, I didn't scream on her, but at the age of 18 minus 3 weeks, I was supposed to go with her to an office of a lawyer on behalf of the Ministry of Defense, who had to see that my mother, being of sound mind and body, is not being intimidated or forced or manipulated. She knows what the hell her son is asking her to do. Ginat, are you absolutely sure you know what you're doing? He said to her. And my mother, I know her so well, with the jaws like this, she said, yes. And she signed the waiver. And indeed, she sent me to 5 years of which she could not sleep very well. I did the best I could do. I became an officer, a paratrooper. I was in wars. I was leading combats. I did my share. Believe it or not, my father, whom I looked for all my life, was here. He was here on my shoulder. My father's, without even knowing it, was behind me, guarding me all my life. But it's not about me. It's about the legacy. And to make a closure for this talk, I'm going to mention another thing. When I came to Ammunition Hill, and with the support of JNF, we received a budget to make commemoration movies over our fathers. I had an excuse to approach my uncle and said to him, his younger brother, do you still have anything for my father you didn't give me? I want to make a movie, a 10 minutes movie about my father. Do you have anything else? And he said to me, where were you all your life? I have a box for you. He went to his storage, came back with a wooden box, opened it, and there was many things that gave me another layer of understanding my father. One of them was this unbelievable postcard. It so happened that when he left the apartment, when he said goodbye, he was very emotional. You could not go to war without making another gesture, and he wrote a postcard to me and my mother. His driver said to me, I saw him writing it on the laps. He sent it, and this postcard arrived 4 days after my father was killed. My mother was in a situation, nobody could show her the postcard. I was a 10-month baby, so my uncle took the postcard and concealed it. And when I asked it 40 years afterwards, he gave it to me. Try to imagine a 40-year-old man, a paratrooper, an officer, reading this to my sweet and kind son and my love. Hello and many kisses. It seems to be that it's coming. It couldn't have been helped, and we must fight. I came over yesterday, but I couldn't say anything. Alon, be a man and take care of your mom, grandpa, and grandma. Meidele, I will love to call my mother. Be a fighter and take care of everything and everyone until we shall return, and we will return fast. See you soon, and lots of kisses, Rami. Once again, at the age of 40, I can share with you now something that I read, showing me that my father and his friends needed us. Everything is combined together. When my mother signed this waiver, she said to me one thing which I will never forget all my life. She said to me, I'm going to sign the waiver. Just promise me, Alon Chief, do not be as stupid and as brave as your father. Listen to what comes from the guts of a Yiddish mama. She's not a tour guide. She's not an historian. She said something that I cherish, but only when the JNF and Ammunition Hill called us and said to us, you guys, you have an amazing tool to preserve the legacy of your nation. I pondered of what she said to me. You should know it because you visited all over the world, you're reading books. You need to understand that histories of nations are being carved by people who are working between stupidity and bravery. And the lesson that I'm teaching kids from all over the world at Ammunition Hill, and I'm going to share with you, is that you do not need to be on the edges to make a difference. Time and again, leave your comfort zone and you can make miracles. You can carve history to your family members, to your community. And this is what JNF are doing. Time and again, they're leaving their comfort zone. They are supporting us so much. And this is why I'm so proud to be leading Ammunition Hill, which is today state-of-the-art modern facility. These are the guys, the friends of my father, who are leading kids to the trenches. They are not talking about death and sacrifice. They're talking about values that kids can share. They're urging these kids to be brave tomorrow morning at the youth movement, at their schools, to make a difference. And kids believe us. Thanks to the JNF, we created in those state-of-the-art modern facilities. museums. You should come over. I really urge you and see these places. And one of the deeds we created, nobody planned it, with the JNF, was to elevate the story to an international level, and families started to come and cherish their own family members from any place in the world. We have a wall at Ammunition Hill that is called Jewish Combatants Honoring Wall. It consists today over 480 names of Jewish people who fought on behalf of their nation from all over the world. We have Australians, Canadians, Polak, Czechoslovakians, Germans, South Africans, Israelis. They implemented the same values my father and his friends stood for. And families coming time and again to cherish the values we stand for while commemorizing and honoring their family members. You can see families coming from all over the world to unveil plaques. We have one great family who became very good friend of ours. You can see here Roma, you can see Mark Witkoff and his wife, they are very good friend of ours. They decided that they need to cherish a family member at Ammunition Hill because he is part of the whole story of our nation. He was brave and is brave like my father and his friends. And when I see a family, amazing American family, comes to Ammunition Hill, led by JNF, honoring us and our joint legacy, I know that time and again, we are one people, one nation. It doesn't have to do with religion or gender, because in the world there are women, there are high-ranking officers, there are privates. Some of them did not fight, but they stood for the values we stand for. And this wall portrays the essence, the heart of our nation. This is why I'm so proud to show you Roma, who became dear friend of and part of the family of Ammunition Hill. You can see here the ambassador, United States ambassador, unveiling plaques. You can see our families are coming from all over the world. So I can talk for hours more, but indeed, it is much better to see you coming over and listening to the stories I can share. And all our visions, all our dreams could not be fulfilled indeed without the commitment, long-term commitment of Itzik and his friends who believed that the stories we tell at Ammunition Hill are part of the stories of human beings, of your future generations. And thanks to JNF, we started the story 13 years ago when 80,000 people visited Ammunition Hill annually. Now we are surpassing every year 300,000 people from all over the world.
Wow.
And this is my story, very short version of it. Thank you for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to. And one more thing, on this wall, to this wall, coming visitors from all over the world, surely not only Jewish people. I was privileged, I'm honored to tell you that I was hosting NYPD police officer missions, parliament, congressmen, high-ranking officers of NATO, your heroes to heroes missions that coming time and again from United States. And indeed, it elevated us to the level of an international worthy site. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided that 400 official missions, when the COVID-19 will end, will come to Israel and will pay a visit and see this wall to see how we chose to remember these amazing families from all over the world.
This is such a personal story. We appreciate so much your sharing it with us.
Very powerful story, and I suspect that everyone who watched it and absorbed it will be sharing it with others. So it's going to spread out to many other people.
Thank you so much.
It
means a lot to me because it sounds better in Hebrew.
Alon, I just want to say, you know, how I love your passion, and you said something, and in passing, it came across very important. I mean, that people know that on the wall, we commemorate people of all faiths. I mean, you don't have to be Jewish to be on the wall. I mean, we have people from all faiths who fought in any war or were part of police forces, and it's just open. It's just a very, very important place. I also want to mention something. You know, Alon, Josh mentioned that talked about, he showed this little picture of the sign that the soldiers put on in memory of the Jordanian soldiers. But I want to add something to this. I heard last time I was on Ammunition Hill that actually a couple of years ago, a delegation from Jordan of a group of fallen soldiers, Jordanian fallen soldiers on that hill, came to Israel, to the hill, and met with the Israeli families, like Alon's families, for a real commemoration, ceremony. And then I heard another story, and if you have any additions, please tell us. But one of the things that really touched my heart, and I've been to Ammunition Hill many times immediately after the war, because I was like 13 when it happened, is the soldiers that came to fight on Ammunition Hill were actually on their way to liberate Jerusalem. And they were like, it was a really bloody fight. And the Jordanians were very, very, so I'm told, very determined and brave soldiers from their perspective. The Israeli soldiers that were given the order to move on to their next mission of going to the Wailing Wall, like to open the war, would not leave until they buried the Jordanian soldiers.
Their deputy commanding officer came many years afterwards, along with his soldiers. IDF brought them from the border. It was a request of Kacha. He actually requested it from King Hussein on the lawn when they signed the peace agreement with the Jordanians. And he said, I want to make a closure. Can you order the guys I fought against with, now there's peace, to come and make a closure with us? It was a scenery that nobody that was there will never forget. We were not allowed to take photos, so you have to trust me, it was something you had to wait for a lifetime to see it. And when they came to Ammunition Hill, this deputy commanding officer, a very old Bedouin with a galabia and a kafia and a stick, was looking all over the premises and said, this is not Ammunition Hill, because Ammunition Hill was north side of Jerusalem, and now it is in the middle side of Jerusalem, surrounded by neighborhoods. And he says, then he paused and says, this is Ammunition Hill. He looked over the region and says, you guys, if this is what you achieved ever since taking Jerusalem for us, maybe you deserve it. And he says, where did you bury my friends, my soldiers? And they pointed 20 minutes and showed it's not a tomb, because they excavated them and they exchanged bodies and captives after the war ended. But then he paused and says, you guys, you will never understand what you did for my soldiers. I will never forget. What you did is a gesture that is so meaningful for me. And for me, listening to this, I waited a lifetime to understand that the death of my father meant something. And to hear it from the rival, from the former enemy, the beginning of the meeting was something very tense, but afterwards they relived the battle. They shook hands. They talked to each other. They relived the battle, 4 here, 5 people there. What you do not know, Itzik, that secretly they kept on coming the past 6 years, every other month. Wearing as civilians, they are coming secretly. We're not allowed to take photos. They need to listen again and again, the way we chose to remember the battlefield, because it was the best from both sides. We came out victorious, but these guys had to be honored. They tried to kill the other side 4.5 hours face to face, but they are honoring each other, and now there is peace, and we stand for peace. And this is why the bereaved families planted 182 olive trees all over the premises after the war ended. In 2 weeks, we're going to pick the olives and make the best olive oil possible. We're doing it every 2 years. So you should come over and see the trees. You should see the trenches. And if you're lucky, you can see very quiet Jordanians walking over the premises, entering the new museum that speaks Arabic, everything been translated to Arabic. The headsets speak Arabic. We want them to come. We want them to understand that after the war, there is peace. There must be peace in our hearts. And that's it. I hope that you will come, and I will see you in our turf as well. Any questions? If not, I'll go back to sleep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alon.
Thank you for listening to me.
Is there a book you would recommend on that war?
Oh, there are some books. In some of them are
I know there
translated.
must be a lot, but I just need one. I don't have time to read them all.
I promise you, I will send Itzik 2 or 3 recommendations that was
Perfect.
translated to English, and they are great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Alon.
you so much. Good day to you and good night to myself. At your service anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Oh, he was very inspirational. Awesome.
So you can, you know, you can go on and we can go on, but I think when you hear a story like this, you just have to really leave it like this. I mean, anything that we can add will just, I mean, how can we even come close to a life story like this and to an unbelievable story that catches humanity? That's
Right.
I really, and every time I hear the story and every time I go to Ammunition Hill, it's just beyond anything. And, you know, the more we spend time virtually together, all I hope is one day when everything settles down, you guys will be able to go to Israel. It's really an amazing place. And, you know, I just, I feel very privileged right now that I was able to share with you a little bit, some of the stories. If you have any questions, that's great. Please ask. If not, we'll see you all tomorrow at the same time. We also have a very, very unique and different story in the second part tomorrow.
Itzhak, how many historic sites does JNF, you know, help preserve and develop?
So let me just explain and make a distinction. You know, Israel, the history of Israel is really ancient. We do not deal with the ancient ruins of Masada, for instance. What we do is the history of modern Israel. When I say modern Israel, I mean, let's say from the late 1930s when Israel started forming. So we have about 78 sites, but we keep growing all the time. So for instance, another site that's really fascinating is the site in Atlit where the first immigrants who were trying to sneak into Israel after the war, and you know, the British mandate wouldn't let them go in. So when they got caught, when they came in ships, they were put in Atlit in this refugee camp. So we helped really restore the camp and reenact some of the events that happened. There's so many sites, and these are the only places that we operate in that are not in the Negev and the southern part of Israel or the northern part of Israel. They're all over the place because we feel that they're very important for modern Israel and for people to know. So and the numbers are growing. The numbers are really, really growing. It's a very important. Russell Robinson, who will be with us, Russell is our CEO. And Russell has been with JNF for about 20 years. He will be with us on Friday in our last, you know, hour. And he is an adamant lover of teaching the younger generation about heritage and about the connections of people all over the world. And he really feels very strongly about really maintaining these sites in order for them to be the bedrock for everything that is happening. So it's a very important part of us. We have one, you know, JNF, as I told you yesterday, is a lay leader driven organization. So we have at least one person here in Arizona who's really passionate about, heritage sites, and he serves on the task force for heritage sites. And whoever is interested, I mean, he'll be more than happy, to tell you more about this.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So much wonderful, so many wonderful things in your history to absorb for us. We just really appreciate hearing it all and living it with someone like Alan who lived it.
I appreciate it a lot. It really means a lot to see all of you, spending time. And I'm not just BSing. It's really, I don't take it for granted that people just spend 2 hours, of their lifetime where they can do whatever they want and see and learning about something that fascinates them. And I think we are far from being able to give like a whole big picture, but the fact that you're seeing like the human factors and alone is just unbelievable. I mean, I'm just, he's a lot younger than I am. When I first met him and I heard his story, and I was like blown away, totally blown away. And him dedicating his life to something that is started as a personal story, but all of a sudden you realize how big of a story it is for other people to share with is just incredible. And I told him when he said yes to coming on at 3 o'clock in the morning for him to, and I said, you know what, I don't take it for granted. I really don't. It's so important. And this is the essence of the country. It really is.
Well, hearing this phrase makes the whole thing really come alive for us and makes us better understand the history that's all involved.
I'm happy to hear that.
And you do need the history to look forward, for sure, is what you said. And that's so true.
Yeah.
Yesterday, you mentioned that even during this time of pandemic, that it's almost overwhelming the number of people that want to immigrate. Can you explain? That's at this time there's so many, but do you know what's behind that?
I'll try, but I have to be a little bit, I may come across a little bit as kumbaya, and I don't intend to, because I'm old enough to know that the world has both. I really feel very strongly that younger generations, with whatever is going in the world, crave the real deal. They really crave to have meaning in their lives. And beyond money and fame and the things that we all over the world worship, they really want to be part of something that is bigger. And I think people can try and connect it to economics. People can try and connect it to any other thing. I feel very strongly that like Josh, I mean, he's a Canadian. Why would he just pick up himself and go to a godforsaken place and start a new life? It's mind-boggling. And I sent you all an email. It's so interesting to me. I'm like, I sent you an email today with some information about the subject matter that we spoke yesterday. And I'm thinking about how sometimes, in life, because we are like trained to think that everything is this and that, and all of a sudden you realize that the human nature is looking for something bigger and something more important And after, we presented yesterday a tiny bit of this new project and the reason with the University of Arizona. And I think you actually mentioned, you were very excited about it. You and Sharon, how do you spell your last name, please? Koch or Koch?
Well, it's in German is Koch, but it's been since Mayor Koch of New York, it's called Koch.
Well, it's like me with it's Becher, but here everyone says Becker. So I sent you the entire information about it because it's how big of a deal it is. And today I just got a notification that we got $1 million for this project with the water and energy security. And people, even people who have money, they need to be connected to something that is bigger and better than that. And going back to your question, I feel very strongly that this is why people do that. I really do. And it gives me a lot of...
I think you have the answer. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
All right, good people.
All right.
Thank you.
Good spending time with you, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
We did on our.
We'll look forward to it.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Good morning.